Hi guys, it's me, CHD, and welcome to another episode of the podcast where today we are reviewing what was a chaotic Mexico City Grand Prix yesterday in Mexico. It was, in terms of recent history, since we came back to Mexico for Formula One racing in 2015, it is probably the best Mexican Grand Prix we've had. We've had some drama at this Grand Prix in the years past, but it was consistently mental, this Grand Prix, really until the very final lap. Controversy, contact, incidents, brilliant overtaking. It had it all. And we'll go through, of course, that in this podcast. Yet again, my race watch-along curse pretty much for this season continues. When I don't do a race watch along, the race that I'm expecting to be not so great ends up being actually a lot better than I expect it to be. So yeah, not great from my perspective, but yeah, it was a fantastic Grand Prix to witness, with many surprises, of course, in the Grand Prix. Before though we get into the context of why everything happened the way it did, let's, of course, start with the results of the Mexico City Grand Prix. And it is a massive result for Lando Norris, winning the Grand Prix by a country mile, half a minute clear of Charles Leclerc in second, who only just held off Max Verstappen, who ended up in third. Brilliant drive from Max to finish in third, considering what happened in his race. For Lando Norris, though, because Oscar Piastri, as you can see, a bit lower down, finished in fifth, Lando Norris now leads the Drivers' Championship. That's why this result is massive for him. And then, I can't even believe I'm going to say this. I still can't believe it a day later after the Grand Prix happened. Oliver Bearman, fourth. And not only fourth, but you could genuinely say, coming out of that race, that you could be disappointed he didn't end up finishing higher, given how great he performed and how great his pace was in that Grand Prix. What a absolutely brilliant performance. I think that performance by Bearman might be the best performance I've seen all season by any driver. It was incredible from the young Brit. Finishing fourth, only, I think, about 10 seconds or so away from the podium. In fifth, Oscar Piastri was, of course, the championship leader going into the race. And now, because he finished in fifth, he is no longer the leader of the World Championship. Kimi Antonelli sixth. Antonelli, decent drive. George Russell seventh. Russell, not great from him. Lewis Hamilton eighth. Hamilton had a troubled Grand Prix, which wasn't necessarily all his fault. Esteban Ocon ninth, good result from him and a great result for Haas. 14 points they scored in Mexico. And Gabriel Bortoleto only just finishing behind in P10. Another points finish for Bortoleto. And yeah, what a mental result from the Grand Prix. But let's see how that now affects especially the Drivers' Championship. And the Drivers' Championship battle gets even closer. Lando Norris is now in the lead by just 1 point over Oscar Piastri, with 4 races and 2 sprint races to go in 2025. Max Verstappen is factually closer to the lead of the championship now than he was before the weekend, but he's only closed the gap by 4 points. The gap now 36 points between Verstappen and now Lando Norris in the lead of the championship. Interestingly, Oscar Piastri has the most wins out of the 3 drivers fighting for the championship, yet is now in second. And then fourth, George Russell. Fifth, Charles Leclerc. What a last couple races Leclerc has had. Lewis Hamilton then in 6th, Antonelli 7th, Albon in 8th, Hulkenberg in 9th, and Isaac Hadjar, who just missed out on a point in Mexico, is still just about hanging on for 10th place. The fight, though, for the top 10 of the championship heats up even more because Oliver Bearman now is only a few points away from 10th in the championship after his 12 points that he scored in that Grand Prix. So that fight to get in the top 10 of the championship is going to be a very close one in these final few races. Meanwhile, on the constructors' side, obviously McLaren the champions. Ferrari now up to second, but only 1 point clear of Mercedes. Red Bull then in fourth. Red Bull only 10 points behind Ferrari in second. That battle is going to go down to the final race as to who will finish second, third and fourth. Williams then in fifth. Racing Bull still in sixth, only 3 points clear of Aston Martin. Haas now up to eighth after scoring the amount of points they did. Again, it was 14 points. And now they are only 7 points behind Aston Martin and 10 points behind Racing Bulls. If they keep up the performance we saw in Mexico, Haas, I think, definitely could finish sixth in the championship, which would be massive for them. Sauber obviously scored a point. They are ninth, and they are actually a slight bit closer to Racing Bulls and Aston Martin as well. So that battle for sixth, all the way down to ninth, is going to be so close, and it is so crucial, especially for Racing Bulls and Haas. And then Alpine, of course, last in the championship. And before we get into the teams, let's get into the race pace data just to give some context as to why the results ended up the way they did. Now, this race pace data is adjusted to fit the difference between the 1 and 2 stops that obviously some drivers did. For example, Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris did a 1-stop strategy, but obviously, and Max Verstappen did as well, but obviously we had Bearman and Piastri, the Mercedes cars also doing 2 stops. So this data, in terms of where I got it from, which is at F1 Big Data on X, make sure to check them out. They're absolutely brilliant at analysing Formula 1 data. They've adjusted to fit the difference between the 1 and the 2 stops. And McLaren, no surprise obviously, were the fastest team. Red Bull were about a third of a second off the pace of McLaren, which is about what I expected in clear air. McLaren were just too quick this past weekend. Ferrari about 4 tenths off the pace, which is, again, as expected. Ferrari were, I think, 2 or 3 tenths away from pole in qualifying. We knew there was going to be a drop-off compared to qualifying, there always is, between McLaren and Ferrari. And then Haas, only half a second a lap off the pace of McLaren, and quicker, factually, than Mercedes by about a tenth of a second. That is just incredible, the pace they showed in that race. And there were parts of that race where they were quicker than Red Bull and even matching the pace of Ferrari at times. They were genuinely a front-running team in that race. Obviously, yes, Oliver Bearman performed brilliantly, but Haas did genuinely have a very fast car. We cannot deny that. And I really hope they keep this up in the final 4 races, because it will make things so exciting for us watching. And then Williams, you can see, only a couple tenths off the pace of Mercedes and 3 tenths off the pace of Haas, which is actually not that bad considering they didn't score a point. Again, just like the last Grand Prix in Austin, if only they had had clear air and had not had a grid penalty with Carlos Sainz, I think Williams could have been right in that fight with Bearman and Piastri, with Carlos Sainz. Obviously, Sainz had his 5-place grid penalty for colliding with Kimi Antonelli in the US Grand Prix. Remember, Sainz qualified 7th and Bearman was down in 10th, and because Williams, this race pace data, of course, is from, a race that was quite messy for Williams. They were in traffic quite a bit. If Carlos Sainz had started the race from 7th, I'm telling you now, he would have been not finishing necessarily in the top 5, but he would have been right in that fight for the top 5 and even maybe the podium. That Williams car at the minute is very quick. The two drivers just aren't executing in the race to be able to actually showcase the really good performance that is there. So, yeah, that's disappointing. And then a bit further back, you have Sauber, Aston Martin, Racing Bulls, all pretty much on the same pace, but Sauber was slightly quicker than the other two teams, and Alpine, no surprise, the slowest of the 10 teams. But anyway, that's enough of the data. Let's get into the teams, and we will, of course, start with race winners, McLaren. Lando Norris did a brilliant job. And yes, the McLaren car was clearly the fastest car this weekend, or this past weekend. Saying that, I still think what Lando did in qualifying was really special. The pace he had to do that lap time he did, what was it, 1:15.5, I think it was. A stunning lap time. And again, I know the McLaren was the fastest car, but I still think Lando was on another planet in qualifying. That was Lando at the absolute best level that we know he can achieve. We've seen plenty of times with Lando in qualifying he can be incredibly fast, and qualifying was one of those days. And then the race was as easy as it could have possibly been. Yes, obviously down to turn one, cars were slipstreaming him, trying to pass him. The Ferraris were a bit more involved with the Red Bull of Max Verstappen, so that took their attention away from possibly fighting Lando for P1. Lando maintained the lead and just ran off into the distance and, won the race by half a minute. Very easy win. Yes, McLaren had the fastest car, but Lando Norris thoroughly deserves to win that race because he was, again, so good in qualifying. And then the race just had to bring it home. Handle the start the way he did, which was very good. He got a very good launch off the line, I must say, did Lando. And absolutely brilliant race win. And now leads the World Championship for the first time since, I think, the Bahrain Grand Prix was the last Grand Prix, or Saudi Arabia, I think was the last Grand Prix that he was the championship leader. That was, 6 months ago. A lot has happened in those last 6 months. But Lando clearly is in better form than his teammate. And talking of his teammate, let's go on to Oscar Piastri. Piastri had a horrible start, got held up behind Tsunoda for way too long, eventually did get past, but that really did cost him quite a bit. Then got held up seemingly for an eternity behind George Russell, eventually with, I think, was it about 15 laps to go, did a brilliant overtake to get past him, threw it down the inside. Russell thought about fighting it back, but let Piastri go, which was kind of him to do so, and very fair, I must say. But it was a great overtake. Shame for Piastri that he couldn't get Bearman, because he was definitely shaping up for it, but then the virtual safety car kind of messed that up. But Piastri, P5, just not good enough. And even though, yes, the start of his race wasn't good, it all started from qualifying. Qualifying in 8th, obviously started in 7th because of Carlos Sainz's penalty. He needed to at least hold position on that first lap to, keep up with the pack ahead and, try to get overtakes done a bit quicker. But because of that poor start, it really, I think, hurt his first stint quite a bit, even though he was behind Russell for quite a bit in the first stint as well, and had, plenty of chances to overtake. I think if he had been right on Russell and the Mercedes car's tail from the get-go, I think he probably gets past quite a bit quicker than he does. So, disappointing weekend from Piastri. Just to clarify, I don't believe the bullshit that Piastri's car has been, tampered with by McLaren and that they're sabotaging him. I don't believe that for a second. There is no evidence of that. he simply is not performing to standard. Let's be honest, these two tracks we've recently been to, Austin and Mexico, they were not good tracks for him anyway. Piastri has not finished on the podium at either of those races in his Formula One career. So it's not like he's dominated here before and we can expect him to do something similar again. And I think that's why Piastri's underperformed these last couple races, mostly, is because he just doesn't like these tracks as much as others. Thankfully, though, for Oscar, the next Grand Prix is Interlagos. He is definitely a lot quicker around that track than he is the last two tracks we've been to. And then after that, you got Vegas, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi. Qatar, he's very quick around, and Abu Dhabi as well. So Piastri's form should pick up in these final four races, but will it pick up enough to where he can, beat Lando Norris enough to at least beat Norris in the championship and possibly win the championship? Honestly, right now, it's too hard to say because you have the element of Max Verstappen, and who knows where Max is going to end up when it's all said and done. So yeah, it really is too close to call at this point in terms of what is going to happen in these final four races. I think for the next Grand Prix, if we just focus on that, McLaren will not be anywhere near as quick in Brazil as they were here in Mexico. Nowhere near for me. They'll be obviously competitive. They'll be fighting for the win. They'll have at least one car on the podium, I'd imagine. So they'll be strong, but again, not as strong as they were in Mexico. I think, and this goes for Red Bull as well, I think what is really going to scupper things is the Ferrari team. Because Ferrari have been pretty quick in these last couple races, and in Brazil, I think they'll be even faster. And I honestly think Ferrari could, and I'd even say at this point, I think they will take pole position for the Grand Prix. Whether they lock out the front row or not is obviously a completely different thing. But I really could see them taking pole, and I personally think they will, with Charles Leclerc, who's in great form right now. And Ferrari are really going to, again, scupper things for those title contenders. Also, George Russell in the Mercedes. I think actually both Mercedes cars are going to be pretty competitive as well. So that's what it really makes the next Grand Prix so unmissable. And a reminder, I will be doing both qualifying and race watch along for the next Grand Prix in Brazil because it's going to be so exciting. Because it's so close at the minute and because it's going to be so close at that track, it really could, any even small mistake, never mind big mistake, could result in 2 or 3 positions lost in qualifying, and who knows then what happens in the race. So McLaren, I think, will be definitely right in there in the qualifying and the race, but whether they win or not, I think at the minute it's too close to call whether they can actually win. Personally, I don't think they will win in Brazil, but they are close enough that they absolutely could. It's going to be, in my view, the race win is going to be between all 4 of the front-running teams. And maybe you could throw a Haas or a Williams in there as well. It is going to be insanely close in Brazil, no doubt about it in my mind. But yeah, McLaren drivers now only separated by 1 point, and who knows what could happen in Brazil, whether we'll get another big swing in the championship. But before we go on to the rest of the normal teams that we go through, let's go on to Haas F1. What a Grand Prix. Who on earth, with Oliver Bearman starting in 9th, who on earth expected Bearman to even finish anywhere near the top 5, never mind in 4th place? I don't have the words right now to describe just how amazing his performance was. Yes, the car was genuinely quick, but he was on absolute top form in that race. And you got to say, at the minute, based on these last few races, Oliver Bearman is probably one of the top 5, top 6 best performers on the grid right now. He is in stunning form. He really, really is. Consistently now making the top 10 in qualifying and starting to consistently score points as well. He really is in great form. And yeah, in the race, he didn't really, he didn't do really that much overtaking. The only overtaking he really did was of, cars that were, obviously hadn't pitted yet or had not made their second stop or whatever. What was so impressive was the speed. Consistently quick through the entire Grand Prix. And then, once Max and Lewis had their whole incident, which obviously we'll get into, capitalised really well and then started to pull away from Verstappen and the pack behind. And right before Lewis Hamilton pitted from third, Bearman was right on his tail and was going to overtake him. Hamilton's tyres had completely gone off the cliff. So, yeah, what a performance by Bearman. The pace was just amazing. And he is putting himself right in the frame for a Ferrari drive in 2027. It is, I would say, likely that there is going to be an open seat at Ferrari in 2027, whether it's Leclerc leaving because he's fed up of Ferrari not giving him a fast enough car, or Lewis Hamilton retiring at the end of 2026, which I think is likely to happen. If one of those two things does happen, I think Oliver Bearman, if he keeps this form up, I think he's pretty much a certainty to be a Ferrari driver in 2027. He, of course, has dreamed of being a Ferrari driver. He's been part of the Ferrari Academy for quite a long time. And if he keeps these performances up, then he will make himself undeniable for that seat, which is exactly what he needs to do. Make yourself undeniable, and they will have to give you the drive. So, yeah, Bearman, keep your eye on this young Brit. He is a very talented driver, and I think because of how talented the grid is, has gone a bit under the radar in terms of the potential that Bearman has. Is Bearman a potential world champion? I'm not sure we could say that yet. But he absolutely is going to be one of the top few drivers in Formula One in, a few years' time. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So keep your eye on Oliver Bearman, especially in these final few races, if Haas can keep up the stunning performance they showed in Mexico. That was the quickest I think Haas have ever been in a Grand Prix, relatively compared to all the other teams. I don't think they've ever had front-running pace quite like they did in that race. That was incredible. And shout out, by the way, to Esteban Ocon, who also had a pretty good drive, finishing in 9th, but it was just overshadowed, obviously, by Bearman finishing in 4th place. But yeah, very important points haul for Haas. Can they finish in the top 6 of the championship? The last time they finished in the top 6 of the championship, it was 2018, I think it was. I think that's the only time they finished in the top 6 of the championship, and that year they finished in 5th. If they can finish in 6th, that would be a fantastic season for the American team. So we'll keep our eye on them, if I can speak. And yeah, hopefully in Brazil, they're right up there once again. But now let's get on to the other teams, and we'll go on to Red Bull, I think, next. Because Max Verstappen, the performance he put in after pitting from the medium to go onto the soft compound tyre the pace was incredible. In a car that I'm not sure if it had floor damage or not. It's not something I've seen, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was a slight bit of damage to that car, because he did go off a couple times, I think 2 or 3 times in the first, 10 laps or so. of that race. But the pace he showed to get himself right back into the action, and let's be honest, he was denied second place because of the awful virtual safety car that came out for no reason. That virtual safety car was rubbish. The FIA had an absolute stinker yesterday. Not only with the penalty they gave Hamilton, but the virtual safety car at the end. That was just absolute rubbish from them. If that virtual safety car doesn't happen, I honestly think Max would have finished in second. And those extra 3 points that I think would have got, him not getting those, again, it could be the difference in Abu Dhabi. But what a drive nonetheless to finish in third. And going into the race, given that he started from fifth, that is realistically the best I could have seen from Max in that race. Leclerc was always going to put up a sturdy defence. Max, though, was so much quicker that, again, I think he would have got it done without that virtual safety car. But I think going into the race, given the pace of the McLaren, and given how quick Ferrari looked, a lot quicker than we expected, I think Red Bull and Max would have took third, going into the race, given again that they started from P5. So a good recovery and a good result for the championship. He is 36 points behind with 4 races and 2 sprints to go. He needs to gain still, I think, about 9 to 10 points a race on whoever the championship leader is if he's going to win the championship. In Brazil, personally, I think he will win the race. I think he will just about get it done. He has been absolutely brilliant in Interlagos over the years. It's one of his favourite tracks, and I think we'll see the best version of Max Verstappen in Brazil, and I think he'll just about get the job done and take the race win. But whether he outscores Lando or Oscar, whoever the championship leader is out of the McLaren drivers, coming out of the Brazilian Grand Prix, whether he outscores them by 10 points or more, it depends on Ferrari and Mercedes if Max does indeed win in Brazil. But also, we have a sprint race in Brazil, and obviously you get 8 points for a win for the sprint, so that could also play a factor. So a lot of points on offer for all 3 championship contenders. But for the race, forget the sprint, for the actual Sunday race, I think Verstappen will come out with the victory. But again, whether he gains enough points on the other 2 remains to be seen. Again, Ferrari and Mercedes will have to play a good role for Verstappen for that to happen, for him to gain the necessary amount on those 2 drivers. But it's going to be very close, no doubt about it, between Verstappen, Leclerc, Russell, Norris and Piastri. I think all fighting for the race win in Sao Paulo. But I think coming out of the weekend, Red Bull will probably be disappointed not to win this Grand Prix, given how competitive they've looked as of late, but they have still gained in the Drivers' Championship, and it is still, I'd say, a 50-50 as to whether he does win it or not. When we come out of the Brazilian Grand Prix, though, Max is going to have to be probably around 25 points behind for it to be still viable going into the final 3 races. And remember, the final sprint is in Qatar. So yeah, he needs to be around 25 points behind coming out of the Brazilian Grand Prix. But we'll see whether he can gain about 10 or 11 points in Brazil. It's going to be very close. Let's go on to the other 2 teams. And I think we'll go on to Ferrari next because there is so much to discuss in regards to Lewis Hamilton's race. And the reason I didn't talk about the Max and Lewis incident, by the way, when I was talking about Red Bull, is because I want to talk about it more so from Ferrari's perspective, because what happened to Lewis in terms of the punishment he received, I just think was absolute bullshit. Firstly, congratulations, Charles Leclerc. Qualified second, finishing second. Great weekend. Can't ask any more of him. He did the absolute best he could have done. That's exactly what you ask of your drivers, is to maximise the car, and Leclerc did that. Second weekend in a row where he has got the best out of the Ferrari car, and second podium running for Leclerc, who is looking to possibly finish fourth in the championship if Ferrari can keep up their turn of good speed. So yeah, brilliant from Leclerc. For Lewis Hamilton, though, I don't think him finishing in 8th was necessarily all down to the penalty he got. He was, after the first 20 laps, his pace did drop off quite a bit. His pace really was not quite there. But he still deserved, I would say, a top 6 finish in that Grand Prix. I don't think he had the pace really to be on the podium. But again, a top 6 was deserved for Hamilton's efforts. At the start of the race, obviously we had a 4 wide situation in turn 1, Norris, Leclerc, Hamilton and Verstappen. Max went off the circuit, which I don't think we can blame him for. He obviously had to brake on the curb. There's no grip on that curb, and obviously off the racing line, like he was pretty much. So that was understandable. I think for Hamilton, though, and he was irked on the radio about it, rightly so. If you go back and look, Lewis Hamilton, through the middle of turn 1 on the first lap, he's clearly overtaken his teammate. And then Leclerc decides, for no good reason, to just go off the track like Max has and just keep his foot down and come back on, and all Leclerc did was let Norris back through. Really, Leclerc should have let Lewis back through as well, because Hamilton, I think, clearly was ahead of Leclerc when Leclerc went off. So, I mean, if they were racing for different teams, I think the FIA definitely would have told Leclerc to let Hamilton through. But because they're racing for the same team, and Ferrari, let's be honest, would have preferred Leclerc to be ahead of Hamilton because Leclerc is better right now than Hamilton. That's why Ferrari said nothing about it. But Hamilton had every right to be pissed off with that, because Leclerc, that was poor from him. That was the only poor thing he did all weekend, was just going off for no good reason. And then, I think, what was it? Was it 10 laps into the race? Something like that. Max Verstappen, who was looking quicker on the medium tyres compared to Hamilton on the soft. Max got close and then got right in the slipstream down to turn 1. And then went for the dive at the first corner. Contact was made. Hamilton got pushed off briefly, then came back onto the track. Then Max went off, came back on ahead, and then Lewis tried to re-overtake and then went off himself at turn 4. Rejoined at turn 5, I think it was, ahead of Verstappen after what was an absolutely mental sequence of events. Now, firstly, before we get into the penalty that Hamilton got, I am surprised that Max Verstappen did not get a penalty for what happened on the exit of turn 1 with Hamilton. Because if you go back and look at it, pretty simply, Max does what he usually does. Dive bombs to the inside and then tries to run the opposition driver basically off the road, or run them as wide as possible until they give up. And Hamilton, I think, had every right to not just give up position. Made contact, Hamilton went off, and let's be honest, Max forced him off the circuit. And then Hamilton came back on. Max then went off, which I think was the sensible thing to do. If Max had stayed on the track, I think Lewis and Max would have collided again, probably at turn 3. And then came back on ahead, and then stayed ahead until Lewis then went back off the track at turn 4 and then rejoined ahead. Hamilton should have been allowed to keep the position ahead of Max for what happened at turn 1, because again, Max forced him off. Max then going off at turn 2, I don't think it was because Lewis forced him off necessarily. I think Max could have stayed on the track. I think he just decided not to. And then obviously Max, who always believes he's in the right, came back on the track, stayed ahead, and then Lewis tried to re-overtake but had no grip and went all locked up and then went to the escape road and came back on ahead. Obviously Lewis would have believed, and I think rightly, that he should have been back ahead anyway because Max forced him off. Now, if you want to argue that Hamilton deserved a penalty for rejoining too far ahead of Verstappen and not using the escape road exactly correctly, then okay, I will concede that. But a 10-second penalty is excessive, very excessive, and was wrong as far as I'm concerned. It was at most a 5-second penalty for rejoining too far ahead and, again, not using the escape road to the exact letter of the law, let's say. A 5-second penalty would have been, maybe you could still argue harsh, but it would have been, for me at least, it would have been fair enough, given that Hamilton technically did break that rule. But 10 seconds, that's race destroying, and it did destroy Lewis Hamilton's race and was unfair as far as I'm concerned. And I feel sorry for Hamilton because, again, Leclerc, he had passed Leclerc at turn 1. Leclerc went off the track and kept the position, and then he gets forced off by Max. Max then goes off to avoid contact at turn 2 and then keeps the position. Lewis gets back ahead, rightly so, even though it was in the wrong way that he got back ahead, if that makes sense, and then gets a 10-second penalty for it. As far as I'm concerned, Max should have had probably a 5-second time penalty for forcing Hamilton off the track. If it had ended up being Hamilton getting a 5-second penalty and Max getting a 5-second penalty, I think that would have been fair. Or you don't give any of them a penalty. Obviously, that is an option. But if they gave both drivers a 5-second penalty so that neither one was better off than the other, that would have been, I think, fair enough. But no. They slap Lewis Hamilton with a 10-second penalty and destroy his race. So, yeah, I feel sorry for Hamilton. He drove well this weekend. It's probably one of the best Mexican Grand Prix he's had recently. And yeah, he just was not helped whatsoever by the stewards with that decision and ended up finishing in 8th. If it wasn't for the 10-second penalty, he would have finished in 6th. And I think, like I said, he deserved a top 6 finish, but the stewards really took it away from him. So yeah, disappointing for Hamilton. But again, encouraging from Ferrari. 2 races in a row, they've been very quick in qualifying and have been strong podium contenders. In Brazil, though, can they go one better and take pole and possibly win in Sao Paulo? The track in Sao Paulo should suit their car a bit more than this Mexico circuit we've just had, and obviously the Austin track. So that should help the Ferrari team, but whether they can actually win is a different story. I think they will be right in there fighting for the win. I think at this point of the season, if they are going to win a Grand Prix, it's either going to be in Brazil or it's going to be in Las Vegas. If they don't win either of those races, then I don't see them winning a race at all, because Qatar and Abu Dhabi are even less suiting, I think, for their cars. So if they want to get that elusive race win for 2025, it has to be in the next 2 races, or else they're not going to get it. Let's see if they can. There'll be a big factor, no doubt, in Brazil and for the championship as well. And finally, on this bit longer than usual podcast, let's finish up with Mercedes-Benz, who I don't think necessarily were disappointing compared to what I expected. I think George Russell was the one that was disappointing. He just didn't have that good of a race. I got to say, on the first lap, him complaining about Max going off the track and keeping the position ahead of him was just total rubbish. He was clearly ahead of Russell. There was no case to answer there. That was just complete rubbish from Russell. But then, he stuck decently close to the cars ahead. Then you had the whole the Verstappen Hamilton incident, and that's where he lost position to Antonelli, and then got engaged in a battle with Piastri pretty much for the rest of the race. Eventually lost position to Piastri. There were some team orders at play. Russell complaining for a few laps to be let by Antonelli to have a go at Bearman, which was the right decision because Russell at that time was quicker than Antonelli, but then Russell couldn't catch Bearman, so rightly so, Russell let Antonelli back through. But yeah, that just wasn't one of Russell's strong races. That was probably maybe not the weakest, but one of the weakest, one of the weakest races that George Russell has had in 2025. If he had been at his best, then I think Russell could have been maybe not on the podium, but very close to it, at least in 4th place. But 7th was, a disappointing Grand Prix from him. Antonelli, I think, did the best he could. I think Antonelli, that was probably one of his better races in 2025. Was consistent, didn't make any mistakes, really. I think other than possibly going off on the first lap, but half the field basically did that. But yeah, his pace was strong. He was consistent. He was always in the fight. He never fell away dramatically. So I think he did the best he could. The Mercedes car just was not quick enough in that race. It was the slowest car in the out of the top 4 teams, and was even slower than Haas. So yeah, they were the 5th best team in that Grand Prix. Not good enough for them. In Brazil, I think they can do better. I think that track suits them more than this Mexico track. So watch out for Mercedes in Brazil. Of course, George Russell has won at Interlagos before. So he, I'm sure, will be right in there. And it'll be interesting to see where Antonelli is as well. But, Mercedes I expect to be a bit stronger in Brazil than what we saw in Mexico. Definitely will be close in the fight for pole, and at least in the fight for, I think, the podium in the Grand Prix as well. But guys, that is it for this podcast. Again, a bit of a longer podcast, talking about what was a pretty eventful race, and obviously talking about an extra team as well. What a story, for Oliver Bearman finishing in 4th. And we have now just 4 races to go in this Formula 1 season. The next one is a race that I've been looking forward to for quite a number of weeks now, especially given how the championship is shaping up. And that is the Sao Paulo Grand Prix of 2025. This race decided pretty much the championship last year in what was a mental weekend. Will it be the case this year? It's going to be so close and so exciting. It's going to be very competitive through the top 10, throughout the entire field. You do not want to miss the Sao Paulo Grand Prix. And don't worry, we've got full coverage on this channel. And I will be doing both a qualifying and race watch along for the Sao Paulo Grand Prix. And my next bit of content will be the qualifying watch-along for Brazil on Saturday, the 8th of November, where we'll be going live as usual, 90 minutes before qualifying at 4:30 p.m. UK time for qualifying. And then for the race, as usual, I will be live 2 hours before lights out at 3 p.m. UK time. 5 p.m. UK time is when the race gets underway. And then we'll see what truly happens in Brazil. And of course, the day after the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, I'll review whatever craziness goes down in Brazil. So make sure to check that out also. But guys, that's it for this podcast. Again, there won't be any content on the channel for the next couple of weeks, as I'm obviously busy with my uni studies. Hope you guys have a good next couple of weeks or so. Before I go, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Make sure to smash a like button before you go. Obviously, it does help the channel and the algorithm. And until the Sao Paulo Grand Prix weekend and my qualifying watch along kicking off the content covering that Grand Prix on the channel on Saturday, the 8th of November, it has been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.